Is the First Amendment on lockdown? Hi, this is Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle Now. And Bill, we have two cases, both related to the First Amendment's freedom of worship provision. One out of New York City, where Mayor Bill de Blasio has reportedly said, and a clip shows him on Twitter, saying that if some churches and synagogues don't shut down during the course of this safer at home kind of initiative, that he would not only fine them, but then he actually used the word permanently close them. And then in Florida, there's a pastor who has been booked on misdemeanor charges of violating public assembly laws and public health laws because he refused to shut down their worship services at their church there. Bill, both of these have a little more subtlety to them than that. First of all, I'm trying to get more information about the de Blasio situation, and so I'm Googling it. All the news sources that have anything about Bill de Blasio saying something about churches recently, and it was at Friday's news conference, all of them were right-wing websites. And the main source that I saw was townhall.com. There's nothing in the Washington Post. There's nothing in the New York Times about this. There's a guy named Dan Abrams at a website called Law and Crime that offered some clarification on it. But Bill, the upshot of it is, and I'll just cut to the chase with this, there was a lot more to the mayor's remarks. A lot more, specifically saying, hey, there are a very small number of a very few small churches and synagogues who are disobeying this. In general, churches and the rabbinical councils have been leaders in helping to protect people. Bill, do you think sometimes we can see violations of constitutional rights where really there's just an effort to keep people safe?
Well, first of all, what difference does it make how many other churches have complied with this? What difference does that make?
I don't understand your question.
Well, if you're saying that there's more nuance to what Bill de Blasio said, because virtually every other church in the 5 boroughs or whatever has basically voluntarily dispersed their services, I don't see what difference that makes when he basically threatens a congregation and not only threatens them with arrest and so on, but basically threatens that he'll shut them down forever. That's pretty much what he said.
Well, he didn't say forever. He said permanently. And Dan Abrams' Law and Order site basically said that there is a subtle difference there. And probably if he had had an opportunity to consider his words more carefully, wouldn't have used that word. But he's sure that de Blasio does not think he has the right as the mayor to shut down a church. However, he does have the ability to enforce public health laws. And during the course of the COVID-19 pandemic, he could shut them down.
He has the legal authority to do that?
Yeah, it's just like they would shut down a restaurant if somebody had been reported to be carrying a disease on the staff there, or if it was in violation of health code.
Well, I know freedom to assemble is your First Amendment right, and I don't know that if it is possible to declare that for whatever reason your constitutional rights are being suspended, then you don't understand constitutional rights. And the reason that I was so upset about the de Blasio thing, I just went off on it on Chronosphere number 10 last night, was because up until this point, a lot of people have been saying, well, you're just basically doing, the government, it's essentially martial law, undeclared martial law. And my attitude was, no, I'm voluntarily doing this to help my fellow citizens and so on and so forth. But when people like mayors start saying that an emergency order supersedes their constitutional rights, and furthermore threatens them with retaliation if they should quibble about this, I think that threat is a greater threat than the COVID-19 virus is.
Well, the upshot of it is it's not just a restriction on the right to worship, for example. It's any public gathering. They don't have sporting events. They don't have rallies. They don't have parades. They don't, they shut down schools. Everything has basically been shut down because in a place like New York City, as we saw, there were, some 500 deaths in the country this day, or maybe that was just New York. I'm not sure. I can never keep track of all these statistics. But there have been a lot of deaths in New York City. Frankly, Bill, I'll be honest with you. As a Christian, I think this is one of those things where Christians are getting up on their high horses and thinking that there's some specific denial to them that's really just everybody's being asked not to do it. And the mayor's basically saying, for that tiny little handful of churches and synagogues who refuse to comply, we're going to fine you. And if you gather together again and you do it repeatedly, then we'll shut you down. And I guess I don't feel like my opportunity to worship Jesus has been violated by that.
Well, that's your opinion. But there's no constitutional amendment protecting you don't have a constitutional right to go to basketball games or any of the other stuff. But freedom of religion, freedom of assembly are specifically mentioned in the First Amendment. And
well, assembly would be a basketball game, would it not?
Well, if it's on private property, that's the person who owns the private property's problem. That's their decision. But just the smugness of it. Up until this point, I considered all of the stuff that I was doing, certainly, to be voluntary compliance with something that made sense to me, continues to make sense to me, out of respect for my fellow Americans and a desire to see as many of them survive this pandemic as possible. But when a mayor decides that he's going to do something like this, you now have really got a bigger problem than a virus. If the ability to declare an emergency means that your First Amendment rights can be suspended by anybody, it doesn't have to be just a crummy mayor of a crummy city. It doesn't have to be a socialist mayor of the most populous city. It doesn't matter. If you're willing to say that any person can declare an emergency and therefore have your constitutional rights completely superseded until that person decides that the emergency is over, then you've crossed the line. And that line is the difference between compliance, which is voluntary, and coercion. And de Blasio, in the most almost glib fashion, just simply said, no, I've decreed that this is the case. And if you don't comply, then not only will I take legal action against you, but I will also bring in punitive retribution against you.
Now, Bill, I will be honest with you. I did not see your coronavirus episode number 10. I did not get a chance to watch that yet. So I didn't bring this topic up because I knew you had said anything on it, and I did not know. No, it's
quite all right.
Did not know that
if you want to see a significantly more energized version of this argument, you're certainly welcome to check it out. It's on our YouTube channel and on our BillWhittle.com page. But basically what I was saying is that of the many, I don't want to call them ironies, salient points, let's say, the primary risk of COVID-19 contagion is to elderly people, and it's the elderly people who did the fighting and dying to make sure that that the freedoms that are given to us is natural law. It's given to you by God. You don't get the freedom of speech is not granted to you by the Constitution. This is a common misconception. That the Constitution grants you freedom of speech. It doesn't. It says you have the freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom to think what you want, freedom of assembly. All of these things are inherent in you at birth, and the government that they've instituted does not have the power to take them away from you. And if it turns out that the simple issuance of an emergency decree trumps those, then you have no rights. You have no rights and you have no protections. The Constitution.
Would this be different, Bill, if somebody was having a frat party on the lawn in New York City and there were 200, boys and girls from the local university who were having a big beer party out there on the front yard? Would you think that the city should respect their private property and say, well, we can't do anything about this. We can't stop this public gathering because it would be a violation of your right to gather privately?
If a frat party was having a party on university property,
no, I'm saying on a private home.
What I'm saying is that if you are going to grant the case that an emergency declaration can be issued where people cannot gather in their homes to do whatever they want to do, and you are going to empower the police to basically knock the door down and arrest people for doing that, I'm telling you that is a larger threat than the COVID-19 virus is.
They already have the right to shut down a restaurant where a disease might be spread.
A restaurant is a public space that is visited by people that don't own the public space. We're talking about your home now. We're talking about your church. We're talking about a fundamental issue. And the reason this de Blasio thing has me so absolutely out of my mind, crazy, furious about this, is that up until this point, pretty much, the American people were voluntarily complying with this for the good of the country. And we haven't had to test this question of whether or not somebody was going to issue those kind of imperial decrees against specific freedom of religion. So if you really want to know what my opinion of it is, I think it's a bad idea for people to be congregating in churches or synagogues. I think it's a public health risk. I think all of that stuff. But that is ultimately the decision of the people who attend that church. And again, you can say, well, this is a special situation and you're just being like a right-wing lunatic because you don't appreciate the danger of this. I do appreciate the danger of it.
So you're saying all the social distancing regulations and guidelines should be strictly voluntary for every purpose?
What I'm saying, Scott, is that I am willing to allow for emergency situations, and I'm willing to allow for the law to be altered in emergency situations up to, but not including, the disruption of Americans' rights, constitutionally protected rights to the fundamentals like free speech and freedom to gather and freedom of religion. If Bill de Blasio, what is to stop Bill de Blasio from basically saying that no one can criticize his administration, no one can talk about COVID-19 unless it's a government agency? What's to stop him from simply saying, if anybody exercises their freedom of speech in New York City, and I find that is doing something to increase the risk of public health, therefore, anybody who issues an opinion that is not in line with the social distancing guidelines or whatever, that person will be arrested, and maybe we will throw something at them a little further downstream. Why is that? There's no difference between the two. He doesn't have the right to do that. And he shouldn't have put us in a situation where we even have to be having this discussion. Because now he's brought something into this that is a much bigger issue than this pandemic. Much bigger issue.
So the pastor in Florida who went and apparently voluntarily went in and after a warrant was issued, he went in and was booked on these misdemeanor charges. His church was apparently a bigger, more significant church than the ones that de Blasio seems to be obliquely referring to. Are you saying that the county sheriff in Florida should not have issued a warrant for that guy who's violating a public regulation during a time of a pandemic?
I'm saying that the person who decided to open the church property that he is the caretaker of, that his right to assemble his congregation and to worship freely supersedes what some sheriff may have decided was appropriate. Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying.
Well, it wasn't what some sheriff had decided. It was, legal authorities within the county and within the state have made this declaration.
Well,
the sheriff is just the enforcement arm of that.
There is an ultimate legal authority in the country, and that ultimate legal authority is the Constitution of the United States. Now, a better answer, a better solution would have been a genuine, on the part of de Blasio, I'm not as familiar with the case in Florida, but the arrogance of it. If this guy was an actual leader, de Blasio, he could have gone down there. He could have talked to these people in person. He could have gone to the congregation in person and implored them not to do this for the safety of their fellow citizens. But that's not what he did. He simply issued an order that we're going to close these churches down and.
Bill, that's not true, actually. He didn't issue any order.
What is true?
He didn't issue any order, but he clearly threatened to invoke the fines, and if the people were repetitive violators, that he would shut them down. We don't have any indication of whether he spoke to them behind the scenes. However, it seems like his administration is in touch with a lot of churches and a lot of synagogues because he's gotten a lot of cooperation from them. In fact, churches and synagogues have taken a lead in making sure that people are safe. But just to take your example, in the Florida case, they had they talked to the church's attorneys, the sheriff's office did, twice in advance of this past Sunday's worship service, and they asked the pastor for a private meeting, which he refused to have with them.
Probably because he had some idea of what his constitutional rights were. Now, as far as the de Blasio thing goes, I'll come back to Florida in a second. What do you mean when you're saying he didn't order, when you're saying that he didn't order that these churches be shut down? He clearly did. He clearly said the sentence. I had it on tape. It's still got it. It's 16 seconds. You can run it as many times as you want to. And it's not just a threat. It's a threat that he is making backed up by coercive force, and the retribution's just a little cherry on top.
This is the 16-second quote. Everyone has been instructed that if they see worship services going on, meaning everyone, the law enforcement authorities, if they see worship services going on, they will go to the officials of the congregation to inform them that they need to stop the services and disperse. If that doesn't happen, they will then take additional action up to the point of fines and potentially closing the building permanently. Now that came after a very long paragraph, which I won't subject you to, that basically said what extraordinary support they're getting from all the churches, and said, look, if you go to your church to have a worship service after being told so often not to have these public gatherings, the enforcement agencies will have no choice but to enforce the law. Does that seem unreasonable?
It is unreasonable. Yes, absolutely, it's unreasonable. They are not enforcing the law. The law says they can be there whenever they want to. That's what the law says. That's what the Constitution says. Is the Constitution is protecting a right that is inherent in you and is not subject to edicts from mayors or judges or sheriffs or anybody else. Of course, it's unreasonable. It is the same kind of argument that you could make with Christian Science. You could say, well, who are these people to say that they don't get the medical care or their relatives don't get the medical care that could save their lives? I've decided that their personal religious beliefs are not worth it. I've made a decision, and therefore we're going to give them a blood transfusion or whatever the case may be. The reason that this is so annoying is that I shouldn't have to be in this position. I shouldn't have to be making this case. And up until 2 days ago, we didn't have to make this case, but now we do. Now we have to make the case. Now we have to make the case that not only is there a virus threat to the country in terms of its medical exposure, there's an economic threat to the country because of the catastrophic shutdown of the economy, and now there's a genuine political threat to the country, which is simply this.
So, Bill, are you saying you shouldn't have had to make the case because these churches and synagogues should have behaved in a responsible manner and done the right thing?
I'm going to finish my sentence. I'm going to finish my freaking sentence,
brother.
It's all right. It's a long sentence. I'm going to finish it. The political consequences, which is simply this, if an emergency declaration overrides your constitutional rights, then anybody in any kind of position of authority can do that at their whim. There's no voting on what determines an emergency situation. It doesn't come from the Pope. It doesn't come from anybody else. Somebody says, I've declared an emergency, therefore your constitutional rights are null and void. And I'm telling you, that is a bigger threat than this virus, a much, much bigger threat.
So do you really think that these congregations did not hear from any pleas from the government, either in Florida or in New York, but in fact just were completely surprised by this, gathered together, and now going to have their buildings shut down? Or do you think that maybe they've been saying, hey, we'll do what we damn well please, not to use that language, but we'll do what we please because this is freedom of religion? What do you think the government should do, Bill? Do you think we should just give up the whole prospect of even trying to do this social distancing thing?
What a ridiculous statement that is. What a ridiculous reduction to absurdity statement that is. You've already said that virtually all of the churches in New York City and around the world have agreed that this is a good idea. The social distancing is a good idea. We've already said that virtually every church in the country is doing things like having services remotely, having them online, all the rest of it. But to say that because these people have made a decision to exercise their constitutional rights in defiance of what a civil authority, some municipal authority has made, that somehow that means that all the rest of it is pointless? No, what I'm saying is it's a damn good idea.
What should the city do?
What the city should do is the city should do what it had been doing up until this point, which is to make the clear case that this is a critical issue and that it is dependent on everybody in order to help out and make sure that as few people die as possible. But if somebody wants to stand up and say it is my constitutional right to go to church for the rest of these people, even if we all die, then that is a more important right than the alternative, simply because the declaration of emergency is so arbitrary and so easy to enact that it is, yes, I'm saying that those people have a right to fight this if that is their choice. If they decide to fight this, the Constitution is protecting their right to assemble. It's
and
protecting my right to assemble.
The city should just ignore it then.
The city should just ignore it then, yes. Or the city the city would be within its grounds, as far as I can see constitutionally, to say that this particular church is having ceremonies. You might want to stay for people who are in this congregation. If you want to do something like that, you're at least off the third rail of whether or not this is. So let me ask you a question. Where does this end if I was to agree with this? If I was to agree that Bill de Blasio has the right to shut down a church that wants to remain open, where does this power end? When does it end? How long does it extend and how far does it extend? And what does he have power over? Does he have the power to do whatever he wants to? And if he doesn't get the results he wants, declare an emergency and then do what he wants? This is a classic example, a really perfectly clear example of the idea that not only sometimes, but most of the time, there's a bad choice and a worse choice, and there's no good choice on the table. Virtually every congregation, virtually every pastor, we're talking about two in the entire United States of America.
De Blasio referred to them as rare incidents of non-compliance that led to his announcement.
They are rare. That's exactly what they are. They're rare incidents of non-compliance, but they have the constitutional right to be rare incidents of non-compliance. And if you want to make this into a compliance issue, if you want to make this into an issue about volition versus coercion, then I'm coming down on the side of volition. And I'm saying that this is a bigger danger than this virus or the yellow fever virus or any of the viruses and diseases that this country has been through in its history. And I'm telling you that if this kind of thing is not fought, and if somebody's not out there making it crystal clear why this public health threat, because that's exactly what it is, there's no question that's what it is, no question. But if somebody's not out there saying that this public health threat that is being generated by this church demanding to meet is not as significant as the threat to the country, if you have the ability to just arbitrarily suspend somebody's constitutionally protected natural law rights on the basis of some kind of a whim or a declaration of emergency or whatever the case may be. That's what I'm saying.
The pastor in Florida, whose name I'm not going to mention just because I don't like bringing attention to people who are clearly trying to get attention, but he has been an outspoken opponent of social distancing requirements, claims that his church has a machine that can stop the coronavirus, vows to personally cure the state of Florida himself, and during a March 18th service, during the March 18th service, the church claimed to be an essential service. That may be on the website. I'm sorry, not during a service. He says that it's a violation of his First Amendment rights. I'm looking for, there was one other quote here. Oh, okay. On March 15th, the pastor urged folks to shake hands at his church and vowed that they would never close. Is there some level of common sense? I mean, what do you recommend? Sort of the neighbors get together and try to stop this guy from meeting just so he doesn't spread the infection throughout the region? Having
the neighbors get together and either in person or outside of the church in terms of a protest or a meeting, trying to make it clear that this is not the case is a perfectly legitimate answer to this, as is the city putting up a series of markers or signs or whatever saying that this is being this religious ceremony is being held in contradiction to what we think are public health and safety laws. Enter at your own risk. All of that stuff.
The sheriff actually did put up a lighted sign in front of that church on Sunday that encouraged people to maintain a 6-foot distance in the worship service.
Now we're talking about stuff that is reasonable, that is essentially a case of volition rather than coercion, and it's the coercion that's the problem, and
the coercion only becomes necessary, Bill, if you've got somebody who cares so much about his own little hobby horse that he's not willing to protect the health of his parishioners.
If you're telling me that this guy's nuts, from what you're saying, from the sound of it, he does sound like he's kind of nuts. So who sits on the board and decides which preacher and what sermons are nuts and which ones aren't? How are we going to determine that in the future? The people who are going to that church are not being escorted there with guns to their head. They're not being forced to go to church. They're going to that church because they believe this guy. That's their business. And that is their business. And this is crystal clear to me. There's no contradiction in what I'm arguing here. There is an absolute protection against against the infringement upon certain constitutional rights, and this is clearly one of them. I wish that these two congregations, or 3 or 5 or whatever it was, I wish that they weren't doing this. I wish we didn't have to get in this position, because we don't need more of this now. But when people say, I forbid you to go to church until I decide that you can again, that is by far a bigger danger than this or any other pandemic that this country has faced. That is the danger. And if we are willing to say that we should allow this, not encourage people not to meet, and all the other things that we're doing that are working so well. We've got, I don't know how many churches there are in this country, but there are a lot of them. And we're talking about two cases, and we're going to violate the Constitution and set a precedent for this because of 2 cases? No, those people have a right to be wrong. I think they're wrong. That's my opinion.
Is it possible that
I don't get to enforce my opinion on them.
Is it possible that de Blasio has merely upped the ante on the rhetoric in hopes that these people will voluntarily stop doing this because they've already ignored previous and many public, appeals?
I just had an interesting thought about this, Scott. What de Blasio has done, and in the manner that he's done it, is he has activated the immune response of the country politically. He's activated the country's political immune response. The country is designed to prevent personal tyranny. That's the entire design of the federal government of the United States and everything that falls below it in terms of different levels of government. He's provoked an immunity response. Now he's created a situation where people like me have to be antibodies and attach themselves to this and cause swelling and fever when it wasn't necessary, but now it is. Now it is necessary to come out and have this conversation. So there are some things that are worth fighting for, no matter how unpopular they may sound. And when people say things like, "Well, you're just being, a stick in the mud. You're old-fashioned. You're this. You're that. You're unreasonable. You don't care about people. Want people to die." You can say whatever you want to about me. I don't care. I have read enough history to know how people die. I've read enough history to know what kills people. Number one killer of people throughout history is disease. Second number one killer throughout history is their own governments. And I have looked at this situation, and it doesn't matter what my opinion is. My opinion is irrelevant. The right to speak your mind, the right to freely assemble, the right to go to church and practice your religion is not granted by me or Bill de Blasio or a guy in Florida, and it's not granted by the Constitution either. It is protected by the Constitution. And that protection has to stand, because if it doesn't, then the consequences, not only in terms of lives, but in terms of everything that we hold dear. The ability to say what we feel, the ability to think whatever we want to, the ability to go where we want to. I am willing to make sacrifices on all of these cases. I'm willing to do that because I'm willing to do it voluntarily. It's not being imposed upon me, but when it gets imposed upon me, we now have a different situation. Now we're talking about the coercive power of individual politicians to trump the rights that I have as an American citizen. And when somebody has decided that they're going to pull that trigger and go ahead and do this, now I have to find myself in a situation where I'm defending this because it's the right thing to defend. There's no question about it. It's the right thing to defend.
Do you think he's actually pulled the trigger here, or has he issued a warning because he doesn't want to pull the trigger?
When he says that if you have these church services, police will be dispatched in order to break them up and will continue to escalate according to need. That's basically what he said, or take further measures, whatever he said. That's a threat of arrest to me.
That's what I'm saying. But he's not actually shut down any church service. He just said, don't gather or we'll fine you. If you come back together after we fine you and keep doing it, then we may have to get to the point where we shut you down. But he hasn't actually done it.
I would be willing to grant that particular aspect of the case. Yes, I would be willing to grant that this is essentially a threat, and that until people are arrested, the actual boundaries of their right to assemble have not been violated. But it's a pretty close thing there. But yes, no, I would be willing to say that. If he arrests people for going to church, then there's no question about it. And that's essentially what happened in Florida. So this is not out of the realm of possibility or speculation.
Well, and that guy, frankly, wasn't dragged out of his office kicking and screaming. He actually went down and got himself booked and was released 40 minutes later. So,
well, that guy sounds like a crackpot when it comes to virology and epidemiology and most things medical or scientific. But he also sounds to me like a guy who understands what's important and where the difference between a bad decision and a worse decision lies.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're grateful that you've taken the time to watch this. We know that during these times, questions are coming up in new and, for us, the term novel coronavirus, in novel ways. There are interesting constitutional questions. There are interesting health questions, and we've debated and discussed all of them here at BillWhittle.com. That's made possible by a growing number of members. This month, frankly, we have seen more membership growth at BillWhittle.com than in the previous 6 months, and possibly the previous 6 months combined. And so we are very grateful for the people who are signing up, for the people who are staying with us through tough times, for the people who value these messages, not just in what they can do for you personally as you listen to them, but for the impact that they can have on people who perhaps don't have access to something that connects with them in a way that they can understand and appreciate the way this does. So thank you so much to the members for making this possible. If you haven't become a member yet, you can go to BillWhittle.com and click that Become a Member link. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks for watching.